Today we're going to do the left front panel. I laid it out the best I could. I'm dotting the corners. I'm going to draw the curve in with the pencil. I ironed out the Cert's shirt. And put a little starch on it in places so I could lay it out a little easier. Now this has got a self-facing placket. They just folded it over, did a little hem, and sewed it down. I know the Vogue pattern's got a sew-on placket. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this how it is, and then I'm going to, when I go to cut it out of the fabric, I'll re-engineer it so it's a sew-on placket instead of a self-facing placket. Now this, I have to add in the width of this, which is 1 3/8. Nope. Yep, 1 3/8. So I'm going to add these to my dots here. 1 3/8. And I'm going to mark here, up here, is the fold lines. I'm going to take a ruler and pencil in the straight lines. This was a slight curve, so I'm just going to draw that in. Probably should have copied it when this shirt was on, but it's not that complicated of a curve. I should have drawn in the armhole. Now these are the seam lines, so I'm going to draw those in with the Sharpie. Sorry about the text messages. Now I'm going to do this, the seam allowances with my custom-made high-tech tool. Sorry about that text message. People obviously want to talk to me. Like I said yesterday, this is a 3/8 inch seam allowance. You could do whatever seam allowance you really want. I usually use the standard 5/8. But I don't know where that piece of equipment went today. Plus I made the other yesterday. It's the 3/8. So I'm just going to do consistent for all the pattern. On some parts of a shirt build, you're going to cut it down to 1/4 inch anyhow. That would be like when you're attaching the collar stand and the collar. You're going to trim that down to 1/4 inch. You don't need all that extra fabric in there to cause bulk. Now you always label your pattern pieces. Cut 1, 3/8 seam allowance. This is shirt, front, right side, buttons. This is a fold line. And of course, this probably isn't your first, but you should know that the grain of the fabric should be running this way. Then I use my rotary cutter. That's for paper only. Now the nice thing about cloning a shirt is the first make from it, you use all the buttons off the old shirt, if they match your fabric. Shh. Coco. Yep, trying to do a live video at home. With the dog, phone messages. I'm pretty sure somebody's going to be knocking on the door soon. There you go. Right shirt front panel piece. This this is the shirt back. I just folded it in half, marking the corners. I'm going to pencil in the armhole. The bottom hem curve. Going to ruler in the pencils, the straight lines with the pencil. Going to Sharpie in the seam lines. This is the back. It's a two-piece. It's a folded in half, so this is your cut on your fold line. Just labeling at the top. So later, after it's all cut out, I'm trying to put it together. I'll have some remembrance of what I did. Now I'm going to add this seam allowances. I know there's a tool you can buy that's like this, costs like $10. I just made mine since I had the extra pens and pencils. No sense in buying something if you can make it out of stuff you already have laying around your house. This is craft paper, not the packing paper I used earlier. Ran out of that. This I buy at Home Depot in a big old roll. It's like $10 for a huge roll. Forgot how many feet or meters it is. I like using the paper, the packing paper, or the craft paper versus anything lighter like tissue paper. For me, they just last a lot longer. Especially if you're going to make 5, 6, 10 garments out of a pattern. The tissue paper is just going to be torn to shreds by using it. Now, I believe the Vogue pattern that we're going to be basically doing next week, which I'm going to be redesigning this pattern kind of like it, a color block. So when I go to start making the shirts, I'll be cutting this up to the color blocks, then adding in the seam allowances where I cut. Craft paper can be a little curly. I'll iron it out later. Time to make my notes. Cut 1. This is back panel. 3/8 seam allowances. Bottom. And there we go. We're going to do the sleeve now. Going to mark the corners. I'm going to pencil draw in the curve, the sleeve cap curve. Now I've pressed and starched the sleeve cutout the best I can, trying to unwarp and unstretch it as best as possible. This clip right here is the front. Remember when I cut up the shirt, I put that clip on there so I'd know what curve is the front. Gonna ruler the straight bits. This is the shirt bottom. The hem on it was a 1 inch. So I'm going to extend these out 1 inch. So when I fold them up, it'll be the same size as that one. It's the shirt piece. Just meant to pencil these in. Now I'm gonna, these are the seam lines, so I'm gonna Sharpie them in. You'll notice I angled the additional inch out for the hem. A little this way, so when you fold it up, it'll line up with that edge. Otherwise, it'll be too short. These are the fold lines. This is the cap, sleeve, cut 2, and a mirror. That'd be the fabric either wrong sides together or right sides together, because you're going to have a front and a front. Cut 2, 3/8 seam allowance. Put the seam allowances on there. If you don't have rotary cutters, I recommend them. Much easier than scissors for most projects. There we have sleeve pattern cutout. Now we're going to do the collar and collar stand. I'm going to mark a couple of the corners. Now this shirt was probably 10 years old, 15 years old, so might be a little not perfect. I'm kind of laying it out what a collar kind of normally looks like, a collar stand and collar. When I do a muslin of it, if it's really messed up, I'll probably just get a collar off of one of my other patterns and use it. Just make sure I've got the measurements right. I'm just going to pencil in the shape of these. This is a straight edge on the collar, so it could actually be rulered. These are short. I can kind of eyeball these. This part of the collar is a curved part, so it's not straight. This is the part that goes to the collar stand. This is the outside. This is the collar stand. The edge I'm doing now is the part that connects to the collar. This longer edge connects to the shirt. Now, depending on what collar pattern you've had in the past, or what the collar pattern of the Vogue pattern is, I have no idea, I haven't cut that pattern out yet. It might be a totally different collar. Now time to sharpen in the seams. Now the nice thing about copying a shirt, if you thought the collar was too small or too large, now's the time where you could adjust it a little bit. With formal business shirts, there is very specific shapes and sizes of collars. For casual shirts, you can do whatever you want. Big collars, little collars, mandarin collars, clown collars. I'm marking these at the same 3/8 seam allowance. Probably going to trim these down either after sewn or while sewing or while cutting up. Well, because on collars you typically want 1/4 inch seam allowances. It's easier to turn them out, easier to get crisper corners. And then where this connects to the shirt, in the shirt curve, I usually go with a 1/4 inch there also. Just makes it easier to ease in the curve, because you don't have all that extra fabric bunching up. That's what kind of makes the collars, when you sew them on, to be a little wonky, is if you have the 5/8 seam allowance, that fabric tends to bunch up when you do the curve. I'll be going over that when we actually start sewing the shirts together. And then there's probably a dozen different ways to attach the collar stand to the shirt. I'm not sure how Vogue wants it done with its shirt, but you could use whatever technique you want. If you're new to patterning, doing from a pattern, you might want to try and follow the pattern as close as possible, because they kind of give the basic directions if you don't have experience doing it. But if you have experience, attaching a collar is just attaching a collar. Now trying to cut them out. Like I said, a rotary cutter makes this a lot quicker than scissors. A lot more accurate. And since these are symmetrical pieces, I could have folded them in half, but since I wanted to make sure I got the curve the best I can, I decided to do them as a one-piece pattern instead of a folding in half. When you go to cut your fabric, you can, if you make a full-size pattern piece like this, you can either fold it in half or cut the fabric out flat like this. It can go either way. If you're trying to match up patterns, having full-size pattern pieces helps, because you can better place the pattern of the fabric on the seam lines where you want them. Now, time to label these. Cut one. No, cut two. Cut two. 3/8 seam allowance. 3/8 seam allowance. Top. Shirt. This would be shirt, collar, the stand, top. And then your interfacing. This definitely needs interfacing. This needs probably a lighter one-piece interfacing. Depending on the fabric, sometimes I interface both pieces of the collar stand, but only the bottom piece of the collar. It's kind of your choice. It's a casual shirt, so I'll probably only use one interfacing on here. Depending on the fabric, maybe not even on here, because it's going to be a semi-casual shirt. There we go. Your collar and your collar stand.